April 1972. Memphis, Tennessee. The Mid-South Coliseum, 9:15 in the evening. A young man drops to one knee in the middle of a packed arena floor, holds up a small ring box toward a woman standing in front of him, and the woman steps backward, shaking her head, and says, "No." What happens in the next 11 minutes will change both of their lives in ways that neither of them could have predicted. And it will happen because the most famous man in America was standing 40 feet away with a microphone in his hand, and he saw the whole thing. The young man's name is Danny Reaves. He is 24 years old, works as a parts manager at a Ford dealership on Summer Avenue, and has been planning this moment for 3 months. He bought the ring with money he had been saving since the previous September, skipping things. Lunches, a new pair of work boots he genuinely needed, a fishing trip with his brothers that he had looked forward to for a year. Because Danny Reaves had decided with the absolute certainty of a young man who has found the thing he wants and intends to have it, that he was going to marry Sandra Whitfield, and that he was going to ask her at an Elvis Presley concert, because Elvis was the first thing they had ever talked about on their first date 2 years earlier, and because Danny believed with the same certainty that some things deserved a setting big enough to match how he felt about them. The woman's name is Sandra Whitfield. She is 22 years old, works as a receptionist at a dental office on Poplar Avenue, and has been carrying for the past 5 weeks a piece of information that she has not told Danny Reaves, and that she has not told her parents, and that she has told exactly one person, her older sister Brenda, who drove her to the appointment where she received it, and who has been the only person holding any part of this weight alongside her since. 5 weeks earlier, Sandra had gone to her doctor about a lump she had found almost by accident in her left breast. She was 22. She had told herself in the days leading up to the appointment that 22-year-old women did not get the kind of news that the lump turned out to be, that the doctor would tell her it was nothing, a cyst, a normal thing that normal young bodies sometimes produced, and that resolved itself without consequence. The doctor did not tell her that. What the doctor told her in April of 1972, using the medical language available at that time, was that the biopsy had come back positive, that the cancer appeared to be in an early stage, that the recommended treatment involved surgery and likely radiation, and that the prognosis, while not without serious concern, was not without hope either. But that the path ahead of Sandra Whitfield at 22 years old was going to be longer and harder and more frightening than anything she had previously known how to imagine for herself. Sandra had not told Danny. This was not because she doubted him, not because she thought he would leave, though that fear had visited her more than once in the 5 weeks since the diagnosis. It was something more specific and, in its own way, more painful. Sandra Whitfield had decided, somewhere in the fog of those first days after the diagnosis, that she could not ask Danny Reaves to marry the version of her that was coming. She loved him. She had loved him for 2 years, since the night they had first talked about Elvis Presley on a date that neither of them had expected to matter as much as it ended up mattering. But she had decided, in the particular logic of fear and love tangled together, that marrying him now, before he had a real choice, would be a kind of theft. She would be taking his future on false terms. She intended to tell him. She had been trying to find the words for 5 weeks. She had not found them yet. She had no idea that Danny had a ring in his pocket on the night of April 14th, 1972, when they went to see Elvis Presley together at the Mid-South Coliseum. Where are you watching from? Drop your state in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. Danny had planned it carefully. He had arranged, through a friend who knew someone who worked at the venue, for the two of them to be positioned close to the stage in a section near the front where the crowd would be tightly packed, but where, if the moment came at the right point in the show, there would be enough space and enough light for what he had planned. The moment, by Danny's calculation, was supposed to come during the song "Can't Help Falling in Love." He had decided on it months earlier, the way young men in love sometimes decide on these things with great specificity, treating the choice of song as though it carried some essential weight that would transfer itself into the proposal and make it more meaningful. He had practiced what he would say. He had rehearsed it in his car, in the shower, in the quiet moments at the dealership between customers. When the song began, Danny Reaves dropped to one knee in the crowded floor section, holding the small ring box up toward Sandra, and he said the words he had rehearsed. That he loved her. That he had loved her since the night they talked about Elvis on their first date, that he wanted to marry her. He could not imagine the rest of his life without her in it. Sandra Whitfield looked down at him. She had not expected this. She had absolutely not expected this on this particular night, in this particular setting, with 5 weeks of an unspoken diagnosis sitting inside her like a stone she had been carrying without anyone else's hands to help bear the weight. And in the collision of all of it, the surprise, the love she genuinely felt for him, the fear she had been carrying alone for 5 weeks, the specific terror of imagining herself saying yes to a future that she was no longer certain she had the right to promise him. Sandra Whitfield stepped backward. She shook her head. She said, "No, I'm sorry. No." And then, before Danny could say anything, before the people immediately around them had even fully registered what was happening, Sandra turned and pushed her way through the crowd, away from him, toward the exit aisle, her hand over her mouth. And she was gone into the crowd before Danny Reaves had even fully risen from his knee. Danny Reaves knelt in the crowded floor of the Mid-South Coliseum, holding an open ring box in front of several hundred people who had just witnessed a public rejection at an Elvis Presley concert. And the song continued around him, and the world, in the specific way the world sometimes does at the worst possible moments, did not stop to acknowledge what had just happened to him. He felt something in him give way, not anger. That would come later, in smaller doses, mixed with confusion. In this first moment, what Danny Reaves felt was something closer to collapse, the sensation of having built something carefully over months and watched it come apart in 11 seconds, in front of strangers, at the exact moment he had believed would be the best of his life. He did not chase after her. He could not move for a long moment. He simply knelt there, the ring box still open in his hand, until a stranger nearby, a woman he never identified, never thanked, touched his shoulder and said something kind that he could not later remember, and helped him to his feet. What Danny Reaves did not know, what almost no one in that section of the crowd knew, was that 40 feet away, on the stage, Elvis Presley had seen all of it. He had been mid-song, the specific scanning attention that the people who worked with him always described running, as it always ran, across the crowd in front of him. And he had caught the proposal taking shape near the front of the floor section before Danny even fully knelt. The way performers sometimes catch the shape of things before the things have fully happened, an instinct built from thousands of nights of watching crowds. He had watched the ring box come out. He had watched the young man drop to one knee. He had watched, with what he later described to a band member as a feeling of genuine happiness on the young couple's behalf, the moment build toward what he expected to be a joyful conclusion. And then he had watched the woman step backward and shake her head and say something he could not hear from the stage, but could read clearly enough in the shape of the no. And he had watched her push through the crowd and disappear, and he had watched the young man kneel there, alone, in front of strangers, holding an open ring box that no one was going to take. Elvis Presley finished the song. He did not stop the show in that moment. There are accounts of him stopping shows for less, but on this particular night, with the situation still unfolding and unclear, he made the decision to let the moment pass without drawing further attention to it, which he later explained to the same band member as a decision rooted in a simple instinct. That whatever had just happened to that young couple, making it into a spectacle in front of thousands of people, would only make it worse for both of them, not better. But he did not forget it. He sent his road manager during the next song to find out what he could, not to interfere, not yet, but simply to know. The road manager, a man who had developed across years of working for Elvis, a particular skill for moving through crowds quietly and asking the right questions of the right people, located an usher who had witnessed the proposal and who, in the confusion afterward, had walked the young man, Danny Reaves, to a quieter area near a concession stand where Danny was sitting on an overturned equipment crate, still holding the ring box, looking like a man who did not yet know what had hit him. The road manager found Danny there. He did not announce who he worked for at first. He simply sat down on a crate beside him and asked if he was all right. Danny, in the particular state that follows a public collapse, too raw to perform composure, too confused to fully explain what had happened, told a stranger more than he might have told someone he knew. He said he didn't understand it. He said they'd been together 2 years. He said he loved her more than anything, and he didn't know why she'd said no, and he didn't know where she'd gone, and he didn't know what he was supposed to do now, sitting on a crate at the Mid-South Coliseum with a ring nobody wanted. The road manager listened to all of it. Then he asked Danny if he would wait there, just for a few minutes, because there was someone who wanted to talk to him. Danny Reaves did not fully understand what that meant until Elvis Presley walked around the corner of the concession stand between songs, having handed the stage briefly to his band for an instrumental section, and sat down on the crate across from him. What followed, in the minutes between that moment and Elvis Presley's eventual return to the stage, was not, by Danny's later account, primarily about comfort or sympathy, though there was some of both. It was about information. Elvis asked careful questions, the kind a person asks when they are trying to understand a situation rather than simply react to it. Had there been any signs in recent weeks of something being wrong? Danny began to remember things he had not fully registered at the time. Sandra canceling plans twice in the past month, citing a headache, a stomach bug. Her sister Brenda calling more often than usual. Sandra at dinner 2 weeks earlier, going quiet and then changing the subject when Danny asked what was wrong. Elvis listened. Then he asked Danny if he knew where Sandra might have gone. Danny said he didn't know the Coliseum well enough to guess, but that her sister Brenda had been at the concert too, sitting a few rows back, and that Brenda would know. The road manager went to find Brenda. What Brenda told the road manager, and what the road manager then relayed to Elvis, with Danny present, sitting on the crate, hearing the truth about Sandra's diagnosis for the first time in the company of a stranger who happened to be the most famous performer in America, was the full account. The lump, the biopsy, the diagnosis 5 weeks earlier, the decision Sandra had made not to tell Danny because she could not ask him to marry a future she was no longer certain she had the right to promise. Danny Reaves sat on the crate and listened to this, and felt the entire shape of the evening reorganize itself around him. The rejection that had felt an hour earlier like the worst thing that had ever happened to him reorganized itself into something else entirely. Not a rejection of him, but an act of love so frightened and so badly executed that it had nearly destroyed the very thing it was trying to protect. He said, "She said no because she's scared, not because of me." Elvis said, "That's what it sounds like." Danny said, "I have to find her." Brenda knew where Sandra had gone, to the car in the parking lot, where she had been sitting alone for the better part of an hour, unable to bring herself to go back inside and unable to make herself leave entirely, caught in the particular paralysis of a person who has just done something irreversible and cannot yet face the consequences of having done it. What happened next is where the story, by every account of the people who were there, stopped being only about Danny and Sandra and became, in addition, about something Elvis Presley decided to do that nobody asked him to do, and that cost him considerably more than the 11 minutes he had already spent on a crate behind a concession stand. He went with Danny to the parking lot. Not the band, not the full security detail, just Elvis, his road manager, and Danny, walking out a side door while the band continued playing inside into a Memphis parking lot at 9:40 in the evening. They found her. Sandra was inside the car, in the passenger seat, the door locked, her face in her hands. Danny knocked on the window. What happened in the next several minutes, the conversation between Danny and Sandra, with Elvis standing a respectful distance away at first, covered everything Sandra had been unable to say for 5 weeks. The diagnosis, the fear, the decision not to tell him and the realization arriving too late that the decision had been wrong. Danny told her that nothing about this changed what he wanted, that finding out she was sick did not undo a single thing he felt. It was during this conversation, with Sandra finally out of the car and standing in the parking lot with Danny, both of them having cried through most of what needed saying, that Elvis approached. He did not make a speech. He asked Sandra directly, "Who's your doctor?" Sandra told him. He asked, "What's the treatment plan?" She told him that too. The surgery, the radiation, the timeline, the uncertainty. Elvis said, "I want you to have the best care there is, not because of tonight, because nobody should have to choose between getting well and keeping the person they love. And you shouldn't have had to make that choice alone for 5 weeks." What followed over the next several days was arranged quietly through channels that left almost no public trace. A referral to a specialist in Memphis with a reputation Sandra's original doctor did not have access to. Every cost beyond what her own insurance covered absorbed without explanation through an account that Elvis's business manager handled the way he handled all such matters. Without paperwork that named a benefactor. Without any condition attached beyond the implicit understanding that nothing about this needed to be discussed publicly, ever, by anyone. Sandra Whitfield had her surgery in May of 1972. The cancer had been caught early enough that the prognosis, once treatment began in earnest under better care than she would otherwise have received, improved considerably. She underwent radiation through the summer. Danny Reaves was at every appointment he was permitted to attend, having told her, the morning after the parking lot, that he intended to be there for all of it, starting now, and that the ring box was still in his jacket pocket and was not going anywhere. Sandra Whitfield said yes in September of 1972 in her parents' living room, with no audience, no song, no setting larger than a small house on a quiet street. Because both of them had decided by then that the size of the moment had never been the point, and that the smallest possible room with just the two of them in it was exactly large enough. They married in March of 1973. Sandra's recovery, by every medical account available afterward, was considered a full one. She lived for decades beyond the diagnosis that had, for 5 frightening weeks, convinced her that she had no right to a future at all. Danny Reaves and Sandra Reaves never spoke publicly about what Elvis Presley had done for them. Brenda told the story occasionally in later years, always ending it the same way. He didn't have to come out to that parking lot. He had a stage and a band and thousands of people waiting for him. He went anyway because he saw a young man fall apart in front of him and decided that finding out why mattered more than finishing the set on schedule. Elvis returned to the stage that night after roughly 20 minutes total. The audience never fully understood what had happened during the gap, assuming it was a technical delay. The minutes that changed Danny and Sandra's lives happened almost entirely invisible to the thousands of people who had paid to see the show, which was exactly how Elvis Presley wanted it. If this story reached something in you, share it with someone who has been afraid to tell the truth to someone they love because they were scared of what it might cost them. Subscribe for more stories about who these people were in the moments nobody planned to remember. And tell us in the comments, have you ever watched someone's whole world rearrange itself in front of you the way Danny's did that night? Those moments are worth telling. Leave yours below.